Profound in the sense that usually people don't ask this kind of question. Background about
Nostalgia.
Nostalgia.
Let's start with nostalgia. Even till date, for a woman to spend time in the field, it's not very friendly. It's quite hostile.
But for me, that was like part of learning.
Okay.
My main thing was getting to know people and what the situation was. তুমি যা বিশ্বাস করো সেটা করো. Our experiences in the field helped formulate that you can have a different view of what women's empowerment is.
So this is where, I mean, I also remember from my readings and several interactions I used to have even with Kamala and prominent voices of the women's empowerment and feminism. The whole women's movement and empowerment evolved over a period of time in the whole feminist discourse. But as we see it today, sometimes I think we settle for too early and too little. What I'm trying to point it out is that somewhere the engagement with men in this discourse is missing, it's alienated, it's delinked. And somewhere the discourse that was started off like, attacking the misogyny has moved to misandry, which is exactly opposite of misogyny. So how do you see the men's role in this whole discourse, and where do you find in your own?
When I started working, I did not exclude men. First, I was the only woman, then I took in other women.
Correct.
We tried to show, as feminists, Abhay wanted a separate women's project. He created one in Jamalpur.
Okay.
Which I had initiated in the sense there was a UNICEF project for women after the famine.
Correct.
And they needed, during monsoons, they still needed work. It was food for work for women. So they had asked Abhay to let me go and start education using the Freyri method for 5 months. It's a 5-month course.
Correct.
And so that they could get, and then it would be winter and they could start working again in agriculture.
Yes.
So over there, I started working. I told Abhay, I'm going to do this for you for 5 months, but my heart is in Shalda. And I want you not to have a women's project. Look at women as part of the whole process. And not only only women and women as a little, quote, side, just to tick your box that you have a women's project, you're doing things for women's empowerment.
Correct.
I'm not undermining what happened in Jabalpur. It was a good project, because after that, by 5 months, it's continued as a women's project, doing a lot of work. But I wanted BRAC to look at women's involvement in a much broader manner. So which means I have to change my co-workers, colleagues, mindset, acceptance. And I had to do it by showing that all of us who are working, all of us women, we are in no way less.
Yes.
So we had a lot of work with the women in the villages and with the men. We did not work with men. In every place we had men's groups, and I found being a woman, and as I said, it depends on how impactful you are, depends on how much trust you can build up by showing that you respect people. So the men I was close to, and I had the added advantage that the women were close to. They would tell me their absolute stories of their homes.
Indeed.
And I think my feminism became stronger then.
Indeed.
And I realized that for women's empowerment to actually happen, for equality to take place at every level, for violence to get for women to be accepted as equal citizens, to respect women, you have to change men's mindsets. You have to get women to be much more assertive and more confident about themselves,
Correct.
because they also imbibe what
Indeed.
they have learned.
90s, I think this whole the term had quite popular at that time in the development space for gender mainstream.
Gender mainstream. Okay, so I started gender before gender
Yes.
came into this.
Correct.
The trainings I would do would always have this component. I
Correct.
remember that I used to work in doing the basic, what we call the basic training for men, for women also, but men, where we talk about class and ownership over the means of production and everything.
Correct.
But we also talked about gender discrimination. That we didn't call it gender discrimination,
Yes.
discrimination against women.
Yeah.
And when we did, and we'd have separate trainings at the beginning for men and separate trainings for women.
Correct.
Later on, we would do a joint together. So I had started this within BRAC, which we continued even until today in Nijaraguri. So when we talked to the women, it was very natural. When we started with talking about lives.
Correct.
So when you talk about lives, everything comes out, the exploitation, the violence, the gender, the insecurities, everything. When you talk to the men, it's only class.
Correct.
So I had two things which we still use. One is, at that time it was very relevant, not so much now, because mechanization has happened, is rice, the paddy cut from the field, which is Bangla dhan. Dhaner dam or chaler dam. Chal is when rice is processed.
Okay.
When the paddy is processed as the rice you buy in the market,
Correct.
ready to cook.
Correct.
So that process is all women's work, totally.
Okay.
Totally. And the price of rice is double the price of dhan. So when this used to say that women are not involved in the economic activities, I'd say, dhan thike chal, the process of
which doubles the value.
It doubles the value, which transforms paddy into rice.
Correct.
Dhan thike chal এটা করার জন্য প্রক্রিয়া কে করেছে? It's women. So I said, what's the price? So it dawns that it's plus we would talk about other things, but this was something that they could economically, see the visually, which they never thought about. It was looked at as the domestic job, part of the domestic work. But also we would talk about if there was no, fuel which the women gathered or created through the dung sticks, where would you get the fuel from? Where would you get cooking, cleaning, maintaining, repairing? So that was one thing. The second is I would ask the men if they had daughters.
Okay.
So whenever you asked if they had daughters, then I would say, do you have any concern for your daughters?
No.
And yes, they always did. They were worried.
Correct.
And dowry had by then started seeping in slowly. We didn't have amongst the Muslims dowry before.
Okay.
Before liberation and all that.
Okay.
Slowly, I think, as poverty increased, and landlessness increased, and women's roles started diminishing economically within the family. There was So then they would talk about the concern, the fear, the worry about their daughters, and the insecurity of their husbands leaving the daughter with 2 children who are coming back to the house. So his father has sold his little bit of land that he has, or his cow, as dowry to get his daughter married. And she's come back, and he's lost his land and his cow and everything. And she's come back with 1 or 2 children.
Correct.
So that then would get them to start thinking that there is discrimination.
Correct.
There is a difference. So we started using that. But that became more mainstream later when, we all started using Windbrad and GAD. Right?
Exactly.
So women in development, women and development, and gender and development.
Yes.
But I think those of us who were out in the field, our field education was much more stronger. So you're far ahead.
Correct.
And doing what was called,
Yeah.
what is now called gender and development.
Yeah.
Before. It changed. It
Correct.
changed people's ideas.
Indeed. Okay, Appa, I think we have been discussing a lot about how the whole feminist women empowerment movement evolved, the whole gender mainstreaming that you were talking about. Now let's connect it with the present. Many reports and many places, there is quite a lot self-patronizing about how women workforce is very vibrant and dynamic in Bangladesh, how participation is being ensured in different spaces. Women-led initiatives are quite there. So there is quite a lot of these things, and I'm not saying that is untrue. Those things are very true. The garment workforce, we know that is more than 75% is a women workforce. But what is your view? Is this good enough to be settled that the women empowerment agenda is being achieved, or that's good enough to say that this space is quite feminist, or you have different views?
You're asking what is known as a leading question.
Because it's true, because somewhere I find it, honestly speaking, I mean, I don't mind saying, I find sometimes that we settle with too little and too early. Just having few women in a particular place, is that really enough?
No, actually, whether it's few or many, it's what is the role and how are they perceived.
Correct.
And I agree with you totally.
Correct.
That yes, it's important for women to work, to have some economic strength in their hands.
Correct.
Helps them to make decisions if they wish to, but that is not enough. And for women who are working, yes, it is like, it's not just being economically independent. It's the social system, the construct. It's very difficult for a single woman to live on her own, and especially from any class, any category, but especially if you are from the poorer communities that are more economically disadvantaged.
Correct.
For her to find a house to stay, her children to be looked after, for her to be able a security, it's totally difficult.
Indeed.
So she may be having the means to be economically independent, but will society accept her and allow her to remain independent?
Correct.
She herself, I mean, this is patriarchy in a large way.
Indeed.
We talk about patriarchy in a very, in sort of what it means in very academic terms or in sort of, but are we talking about it, what it really means to somebody's life? And it's difficult. Even like my colleagues, as single women find it difficult to find houses to rent, to be able to live. Now, the moment she's single, everybody starts looking for a groom for her.
Correct.
Whether she's been never married or whether she's been married and is now single. They feel threatened somehow of having a single woman. Now, a woman herself also feels insecure.
Indeed.
So I think there's still so much work to be done. And just numbers is not enough. One is the tokenism, which exists.
Indeed.
We've done that. You tick the box.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there's a general wide public who fear the word feminism. And they look at feminism in a very stereotyped manner, which they have been fed.
In a very shadow of this. I had one memory of this workshop where some of the participants said that I want women empowerment, but I don't want my daughter or my sister to be a feminist. I said, why? Because feminism means women who behave like men, who smoke cigarette, who will have no boundaries, etc.
Which is very shallow.
Which is absolutely very shallow. And it's very sad.
And so it's not just men. Even women themselves would say, I am not a feminist. So I think one of the examples I do give quite a lot is the example of this university teacher, Rumana Manzoor, whose husband blinded her. She was a teacher in the Dhaka University.
Okay.
So masters and all that. She lived in her parents' home with her husband and a child. She never let on to people that she had a marriage that was dysfunctional or that was violent. She gave the impression that everything was all right. She got a scholarship to go abroad to study. And while she was there, that she could open up and tell about her stories, and they told her that, why are you accepting all this?
Correct, yeah.
So she came back and she wanted to take her daughter with her. And when she told her husband she was going to divorce him and that she was going to, he physically assaulted her, blinded her, assaulted her in a very brutal manner. It was all over the news because I think it was before you came. Otherwise you would have known about her. So for me, this was an example. Later on, everybody got together. She had a lot of support from a university in Canada, Canadian government. They got her there, even her parents and family, so that they could look at her, because she's totally blind now. She tried to get treatment first in Hyderabad, in India, then in Canada. So here's a woman who has the highest degree. She's independent in terms of economically. She's working. She's a professor. She was not a professor then. She was younger, but had all the thing of going high up in life with getting
all the tick boxes that we can think of,
And she's not living with her in-laws. He's living with his in-laws, and yet he felt he had the right to control her and teach her a lesson. By brutally, he could have killed her if she hadn't shrieked so much. So I just say that, you have such a situation also. So just being economically independent and being educated is not enough. It's your mindset, because all her friends later on, who were her friends, told me that, she has never once ever said that this is what she's going through. Even if some of the friends she had were single women who walked out of abusive marriages and were living on their own. Even that she didn't say. So the fact is that just by itself, what you mentioned is not enough.
To that courage to have that voice to stand for self, not necessarily comes only by having university degrees
or having a job. Like even if you go back to women working in the villages who are earning their own money, or women who are working in the garment factories, she will not, unless she has the ability to walk out and the courage to withstand whatever the society. The reason she doesn't have the courage is she's worried what society will label her as.
So I absolutely agree with you. And in the same context, I also feel that like the way by having women in the role of leadership, not necessarily ensure the women empowerment for them. Similarly, by just having men doesn't mean there is a presence of patriarchy. Eventually, it is all being demonstrated, manifested through the systems that we have, the instruments of, function, instrument of operation, instrument of change that we deploy. That basically defines whether we are on which side.
Absolutely. And also you have to internalize it, not just understand it at an intellectual level.
Indeed.
I think biggest lacking now is we don't internalize it or feel it. I have met with women who say that, I'm a gender specialist, or I'm a professional gender professional. I'm not an activist, I'm a professional, gender professional. What does that mean? So how can you, you feel it. I mean, activism doesn't only mean that you're out on the streets and chanting slogans. Activism means that you live your life and you help others who need it to change their lives, to be able to stand on their own.
Absolutely.
and to
Absolutely.
change even men. I mean, as you
Indeed.
said,
Yeah.
that men are an integral part of society.
Yes.
And they have to change their attitudes of looking at women as human beings.
Correct.
And also learn how to respect themselves. I think men who do not respect women don't respect themselves.
Yeah.
It comes from...
One of my friends had started this whole initiative called Men Engaged. I don't know.
Yes, I know it. Yeah.
It's still
It's still there. They're
still
part
there.
of this
Yeah.
South Asian Peace Action Network.
Correct.
We have
Correct.
someone.
Yeah.
Ben
So
Engaged,
Lakshman Belbas is
Lakshman
it's my
Belbas,
very
and
good
I
friend.
keep... Oh, he is.
He's very good
I
friend
get
of mine.
inundated by all these emails he keeps sending.
Okay.
Yeah.
We worked together in Kathmandu before he left to
Okay.
US, so I know him. And I've been, of course, involved in the whole Men Engaged discourse as well from India.
I didn't meet him, but
Yeah.
I got introduced through a good friend, Kamla Vaseem.
Kamla, yes. Yeah.
So, but there's so much that needs to be done. And it's true that I don't think we may have made progress in terms of indicators.
Correct.
We may have made progress in terms of much more opportunities for women to work in different aspects, for women to go up the ladder. There is, all that we may have made a lot of progress in.
Yeah.
But have we really made progress in changing attitudes, changing both men and women's attitudes?
Indeed.
Understanding what patriarchy is, how it is so overpowering, and it's there, sab jagah patriarchy. It's so omnipresent in every aspect.
Too intimidating.
And intimidating. And you need to challenge
us, like some of the men who are in the part of this discourse and movement, sometimes very isolated.
Absolutely.
And it's a bit lonely journey.
I'm sure.
For some of the, because when we have such dialogues, whether it is in the small space of at home or whether it is in the professional space, sometimes there is an isolation.
I think we need to get together
more.
And, we have feminist dialogues, but
Correct.
I think we need to have feminist dialogue not just amongst women.
Correct.
Or just amongst certain groups of LGBTQI or
Indeed.
non-binary.
Indeed.
Gender fluid and
exactly.
Exactly. But we need to have dialogues between people who think alike whatever they may be.
Correct.
And whatever their sexual orientation or identity or what it may be.
Yes.
But those we think together, because as you're saying, it's isolating. And I think it's important we sit together and talk about it.
And to have that strength for each other, So
and
that's
also we need to do a lot of things like break this, like being a feminist is not a bad word.
Absolutely. This whole stereotyping and barriers.
Being an activist is not, you're demeaning and you're not going up the ladder and you're not respected enough.
Correct.
I think also another word which we're not discussing today, but at some point maybe you can bring it up in one of your podcasts, is what does secularism really mean?
Yes, that's going to be a separate whole thing together. I'm sure we'll have opportunity.
I think there's so much misunderstanding about these words.
Absolutely. Correct. You're absolutely right. Coming to an end and conclusion, this is a really very interesting conversation, and I do believe that this is one of the many that we're going to have. But like Oxfam always claim, we are a feminist organization. And within Oxfam, of course, we do question that what we mean by this, whether we have really achieved something to claim to be feminist, or we should say that, okay, we desire to be feminist. You have seen Oxfam in many roles, many ways, last 50 years. And it has its own journey with ups and downs. What suggestion, what advice, guidance that you would like to have to Oxfam here for this leadership to take this discourse forward?
So no guidance, but thoughts, yes. So because we are facing the same issue in Nijirakuri too. I mean, as a person who's leading the organization as a feminist, I have all my colleagues who are not feminists either. but we try and inculcate. So all I can say is that it is important to keep discussing it, not to shy away by saying that you are speaking in a too advanced a manner, that your organization is not yet ready, the staff are not yet ready, people in the villages are not yet ready. I don't think there's any time that you say that is not yet ready and that people are ready. I think it's very important to keep talking all the time and bringing out where we find that there are lapses. We're all striving for something. And it's centuries, millennia old systems that we are trying to break and that has been inculcated within us. So we need to learn how to overcome that. And I think it's most important that we keep this discussion going and not to shy away from saying things which may seem extreme. Nothing is extreme. You can have differences. And so let's discuss those differences. Differences in perception. Correct. So it's the same advice I'll give you that I give myself.
I remember, I think it would be a good note to remember my experience anecdote with Kamla when after my initial training, I was quite in the sense of a guilt that I represent perhaps that clan of patriarchy that has been doing this and this is so. What am I as being a man, and I don't have control over it. And I talked to Kamla to that, and she said that no, Ashish, it's not carrying guilt; it's carrying that sensitivity. As long as you allow a woman within you to flourish, not a feminist, not necessarily every action, every thought, everything that you will be doing will be exactly the way it should be, because that baggage is quite heavy. It cannot be offloaded within things. But this consciousness is important because that will keep you going. So I think that applies to organizations as well, as long as we continue with that consciousness. So thank you, Appa, for being here and being with us. And I'm sure this is really very inspiring conversation that we have had with you today. And I'm hopeful that we'll have many more. While having this podcast and it has its own audience, I have already a couple of ideas that how this conversation can happen, even with our close group of leaders within Oxfam, and how can we continue this learning forward? Because these days, as I last time also in episode, I said that we don't read much, and that's really not a thing that should happen. I try best, but if not that, then this podcast, this conversation is as good as reading a book. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to meet and talk and discuss ideas, discuss experiences. Everyone's experience is useful. I hope mine will also be useful. I think having this conversation is useful, so I do want to thank you, thank Oxfam, and thank everybody who's been behind the camera and everybody who's been listening to this. I don't know what your outreach will be, but definitely it'll be useful. Thank you so much.
Today's conversation was again very insightful for every one of us. I believe that you must have found your own inspiration from this conversation. Oxfam Podcast is basically an effort to have this dialogue, to bring in people, to create discourse on various topics that are relevant to us and our work, and to create awareness about so many things that are happening around. So I'm sure that you must be liking this effort. If you think so, then please do share this podcast with your friends, your colleagues, to subscribe us and like us and share your comments. They are very important to us. We are going to soon name this effort. We have few suggestions, but let's see. We would really like to have your interaction and we really appreciate your presence here. So thank you so much again.